Hello guys, I'm going to talk about a very important essay called Irony as a Principle of Structure by Cleanth Brooks. As all of you know, Cleanth Brooks is a new critic. The new critics gave a lot of importance to the structure of a poem, the form of a poem. In this essay, Cleanth Brooks says that modern poetic techniques give a lot of importance to metaphor. Modern poetry is heavily modeled on the metaphoric structure. What do you mean by that? Metaphor means dealing with concrete particular examples to convey an abstract idea. Metaphor deals with concrete particular examples, isn't it? For example, the metaphor of rose for love. Rose is a concrete example for the abstraction called love. So, metaphor goes from concrete to abstract, which is like the opposite of what normally language does. Normally, language talks about abstract ideas and gives concrete examples. Opposite happens in poetry. Did you understand? And then Cleanth Brooks says that this is like a kite. You know the kite? It has a string and a tail and then a paper body. The paper body is like the universal or the abstract. The tail is the concrete metaphor. The kite is flying because of the tail. You understand in poetry, you understand universal ideas because of concrete examples. Take the wasteland, for example. The wasteland gives a lot of concrete examples of modern life. Modern people living in different situations. Also mythological life. They're all concrete examples. Each character is a concrete metaphor for the universal idea of a wasteland like modern existence. You get to know the universal idea or the abstract idea from the concrete particular example. Clear? And the universal idea is like a kite. The kite is flying because of the tail. The tail is more important than the kite itself. But one problem is there. The kite, the tail is weighing down the kite. The weight of the kite is in the tail. You know, you feel like if the tail was not there, the kite would just fly up. In other words, if you didn't have this roundabout way of metaphor, you feel that meaning could have been easily conveyed. Why do you need metaphor? Why are you saying in a roundabout way, in an indirect way? Why do you need a metaphor? Why can't you just say the universal meaning? Cleanth Brooks says, then it will not be poetry. For a piece of writing to be poetry, it requires metaphor. Did you understand? The focus on the metaphor, yes, it is indeed an indirection. Instead of saying the people of the wasteland are all living a meaningless life, how meaningless life is, how traumatic life is. Instead of saying directly like this, he is showing typist, he is showing Philomel, he is showing Phoenician sailor who has drowned, he is showing Fisher King. So these are all metaphors. These characters are metaphoric of modern man's existence. Instead of directly making the statement, he's in a roundabout way saying things through metaphors, correct? But Cleanth Brooks also says metaphor means not only indirection, metaphor also means organic unity. You know, poetry is full of poetic images. Each poetic images is like a flower. Okay? And these flowers are not arranged like a bouquet. Cut the flowers, arrange them artificially in a bouquet. That is not poetry. Poetry is like a plant which has flowers. The flowers are on the plants. There is an organic relationship of the flowers with the plants. Poetry is as organic as flowers on a flowering plant. And Cleanth Brooks says poetry is as organic as the different elements of drama combined in a play. A play is a combination of different parts of drama, isn't it? Different elements. Like many elements of drama combine to form a play. Like that, metaphor unites many elements to form unity, organic unity. And the organic unity of poetry emerges from its relationship with the context. The form of poetry, even though the new critics focused on the form, they looked only at the form, they did not completely negate context. Context is there contained in the form itself. That is what Cleanth is proving here. Irony is structure or form, but actually irony means relationship with the context. You didn't understand. I will explain. Cleanth will explain. When you say one statement, I understood. You understood everything. You understood everything. You read The Wasteland and you understood everything. When I say that you understood everything, in the context of The Wasteland, in the context of my expression, you know that what I mean is you did not understand. That is irony. In that particular context, my statement has a new meaning. You read Wasteland and you understood everything. When I say that, that means you did not understand. So my statement has a new meaning because of the context. When context decides meaning, that is called irony. Cleanth is saying that a poem's organic unity is related to its context. It is context that gives meaning. For example, he gives one sentence from King Lear, ripeness is all. What is the meaning of that statement? Ripeness is all. You look up dictionary. You get all the synonyms of ripeness. Ripeness means maturity. Ripeness means vitality. Ripeness means like that, different words you get. Vitality is all. Maturity is all. If you replace ripeness with dictionary meaning, will you get the real meaning of the statement? You will get the real meaning of its statement only from the context. You have to know when in King Lear this is spoken, why it is spoken, what is the, then you get, that is the meaning. Ripeness is all is a statement that gets its meaning from the context. That makes it an ironic statement. Ironic statement means meaning created by the context. If it is not, that is what is called great poetry. If it is not ironic, poetry will just be sentimental. I am saying every point that Cleanth said, okay, I am not saying this myself. All these things Cleanth said in irony as a structure as a principle of structure. Irony as a principle of structure. Now, after having talked about ripeness is all, Cleanth talks about how context, he talks further about how context shapes the meaning of statements. Sometimes, because of the context, a meaning can mean its opposite. Clear? And then he quotes from Gray's elegy, can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion called the fleeting breath? When he asked that question, that rhetorical question, what he is meaning is the opposite. Storied urn, animated bust cannot call back the fleeting breath. That is the meaning. So that is an example of irony. And using these examples, Cleanth shows that much of poetry is based on irony. Because much of poetry has meaning based on context. Most poetry examples that you think of will have meaning based on context, isn't it? That means much of poetry is ironic. And then he talks about little bit about different kinds of irony. Tragic irony, self-irony, playful irony, etc. And then he says, there are some statements which are not ironic. Take mathematical statements like 2 plus 2 makes 4. Then he talks Pythagoras theorem. He gives the example of Pythagoras theorem. Some other theorem he gives. The square of the hypotenuse of the right triangle, correct, Pythagoras. The square of the hypotenuse of the right triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the two sides. A square plus b square is equal to c square. These statements do not have irony because they are not dependent on context. There is no context here. They are just universal statements. In case 2 plus 2 makes 4, you see some connotation there, some metaphoric meaning there. He says that metaphoric meaning is not relevant in 2 plus 2 makes 4. In that mathematical equation, whatever metaphoric meaning you say is not even relevant. But poetry is not like that. Poetry is completely based on connotation. Poetry is completely based on metaphoric meaning and connotation. and metaphor and irony, connotation, etc. form an integral part of the structure of meaning of poetry. Poetry does not get meaning if it does not have connotation. Every statement in poetry is modified by context. Irony has played a major role in modern criticism, but Cleanth says modern critics have also stretched irony beyond the limit. They have attributed too much importance to irony. Then he talks about Dover Beach of Matthew Arnold. In Dover Beach, Matthew Arnold says, neither joy, nor love, nor light, nothing is there. Without the context, the full significance of that statement you can't understand. The full significance of that statement in Dover Beach lies in its context. And that statement in Dover Beach is an example for irony. Clear? Then, he says, when you read poetry, you will ask a lot of questions. What was the writer thinking? How is the writer expressing his thought? How is this based on the experience? How can you get the meaning of this statement based on the context? Ultimately, when you read poetry, what you are doing is reading the context, reading according to the context. The context is full of clashes, conflicting elements. The pressure of the context is what creates irony. Did you understand? And he says this is similar to I.A. Richards' concept of poetry of synthesis. I.A. Richards talked about poetry of synthesis. What do you mean by that? In poetry of synthesis, even oppositional elements will be there. For example, the dominant tone of, the Tempest is the greatness of Prospero. The dominant tone of the Tempest is the greatness of Prospero. But even Caliban's voice is there. Caliban's speech is there. That is an oppositional element. Great poetry incorporates the margins also, incorporates oppositional elements also. Did you understand? That means great poetry fuses the irrelevant and the discordant aspects also. The absent meanings also are incorporated. How many absent meanings are incorporated in Wasteland? Wasteland is not only about present meanings, it is a combination of all the conflicting, discordant, absent meanings also. So that is poetry of synthesis. And in poetry of synthesis, all these conflictual elements will be there and ultimately it will become a structure. All these conflictual elements will become a structure. This is an example of irony. And Cleanth is now giving an added meaning of irony. He is saying that irony is pressure of context. Context is so discordant. Irony means this confusion, this destabilization of meaning, so many meanings coming up. But irony also means stability. Irony means that all these discordant, confusing meanings will create, like the solar system, it will pull each other and create a stability. The Wasteland has such a stability. A great poem, therefore, a poem of synthesis, poetry of synthesis, will have discordant elements, but these discordant elements will finally form a structure. That is the additional meaning of irony. Great poetry becomes invulnerable to irony. Great poetry becomes invulnerable to destabilization. It is destabilization. Wasteland is so much confusion. But all that confusion became stabilized into the wasteland. Irony is confusion. At the same time, irony is stability. Great poetry, which has irony, becomes invulnerable to irony. A classic example, a great example he gives for this. Do you know what that is? An arch. An arch, a gateway. For example, if you are making a gateway like this, the bricks that form the gateway are all threatening to fall. When you make an arch like this, the bricks on the top here, they are all threatening to fall. But that combination of the destabilization force in a particular point creates a stability. Isn't it? The poetry, which is full of destabilization elements, will at a particular point create a stability. Like in an arch, all the bricks that threaten to fall will help each other, will support each other, and it will form a certain stability. Cleanth says that in an arch, like in poetry of synthesis, stability is based on thrust and counter thrust. these bricks on the top are threatening to fall. These other bricks are holding it up, falling, holding, falling, holding, thrust, counter thrust, stability. The forces that threaten to bring down the arch or poetry itself provides the principle of support. So, great poetry has irony. Great poetry has irony means it has the pressures of context, but at the same time, it also has a stability. Got it? Irony as the principle of structure by Cleanth Brooks.